that sword you made in that video 5 years ago? That shit was asymmetrical. That shit was so bad. And that video is still online. You fucking idiot.
Hey, welcome back. So today we are gonna go over how to do your first sword with pixel art in Photoshop. And if you are interested in getting started with Photoshop for pixel art, please check out my other video which I uploaded just a few days ago, in which I go over the basics of how you can set up a workspace like I have here and just get banging on those pixels. So a few years ago I made a video how to do exactly this, and I didn't do such a great job. I think the hilt of the sword in that video was pretty bad. I made it asymmetrical. Like, there's a bunch of stuff I could fix and I will fix today. So to begin, we're gonna go with a diagonal sword, but people also do a straight sword. And the reason we're gonna go diagonal is because usually that's the like perspective in which people draw swords for games, but you can also do straight, which kind of looks tiny bit weirder, but it's still fine. I've seen a lot of straight swords in games as well. Um, so the reason we're doing a sword at all is because sword is a very basic item in many RPG games, and people who start pixel art usually are doing that because they either really like the art, which is what I find to be less common, and more common is somebody who's either a programmer or just beginning to get interested in making games. And pixel art seems like the simplest and cheapest way to start making some of your own art that you can put into the game. And that's like the common story in how people get started. So yeah, that's why we're gonna do a sword. And if you are interested in more items, like different types of items or something, I'm sure I'm gonna post more videos related on that topic. So yeah, I guess subscribe. That's probably the first time I said that on this channel in a video, but that's the way you stay tuned. So what I'm doing here is I'm gonna start by drawing the blade, very top of the blade. And so here's how you can make sure that this stuff is symmetrical. First of all, you can count how many pixels you have in each of these directions. Basically, you have 5 here and 5 here, so that's fine. um, Now you can do a straight line by just clicking somewhere, holding shift, and clicking somewhere else, and there it is, like a perfectly diagonal line. Now I'm going to select it and use the move tool to just move it slightly over here, and then make a copy and do it here. So now we have a nice basis for a blade. If you're interested in more of these like shortcuts and tricks, please do check out my Photoshop tutorial. I don't want to spend too much time like explaining all the tools I'm using now, because I do that in that other video which is dedicated to that. So let's assume you know how to use these basic tools and just continue drawing the sword. So I'm gonna, whatever I'm doing on the left side, I'm going to do it on the right side and do it exactly in the same manner. I'm going to count the pixels. If I'm drawing like a line where the count of pixels might become um, ambiguous, basically, I'm going to count every single pixel that I put. You can also turn on a pixel grid, which is a grid that you can go to View, Show, and Pixel Grid. And in this case, you're going to see a grid of every single pixel in your sprite. So that might be useful to you. I don't personally use it. I feel like it creates too much noise and clutter and just doesn't make it possible for me to see the sprite very clearly. So I turned that off. But hey, everybody's got preferences. So now we can do something like this, basically. Now I'm just going to copy a bit of this because it's already a nice diagonal line, and we'll put it there, and we'll also do another one here. Is it fine? No, 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 it's not. So, okay, right. Anyway, yeah, let's call that a sword. Maybe the hilt is like too thick. Let's try to make it a bit thinner. Okay, I messed something up here. All right, cool. All right, so that's the first way you can ensure symmetry, and it is not immune to error because you have to account for the symmetry yourself. And even while recording a video and talking about doing that, you can make a mistake such as I did. So I think the more appropriate way to go about this would be to use the symmetry tool. Now, I don't know if this tool is available in every version of Photoshop. I don't remember seeing it in older versions, but I'm pretty sure that most painting tools nowadays have this sort of tool, and Photoshop now does it as well. So I'll show you what this does in a moment. So let me create a new layer. We're gonna put this sword into hiding, and now we have a fresh layer. So if I go to the symmetry tool, I can choose what kind of symmetry I want, and I'm gonna go for diagonal, and I will ensure that symmetry happens in an area. Basically, it lets you choose in which area you want your drawing to be symmetrical. So I will stretch this area to cover my entire canvas, press enter, and now you can see that this line is activated. So this line is just a helper, it's not a part of your image, it's just Photoshop's way of telling you, okay, this part will be mirrored over there. And as you can see now, when I did a doodle, it already works. So I can just start drawing something, and it's gonna make sure that it comes out symmetrical basically on both of these sides. And here we go. We have something going on. Now it might be a little bit too thick. So I don't know why I drew it in such a way, like from the other side, but all right. So now that I no longer need it, I'm gonna turn it off, and then we can just do something like this. Now I need it again, so I'm gonna turn it on. And you can also, as I mentioned in my previous video, make yourself a keyboard shortcut for all of this. But for now, I'm not using one. Basically, create a nice handle. Okay. And what's really cool is also if you're using the eraser tool, like when I'm erasing stuff, it also erases on both sides. So that's pretty handy. So this sword I actually maybe don't want to be symmetrical. So I'm gonna turn the symmetry off. I'm gonna do something like this. So all right, I think that looks a bit better for a demonstration of a sword that doesn't necessarily have to be symmetrical in all manners, just as long as you use the tool for whatever you need it. For example, just this hilt, that's fine. You can just make another different fancy blade, and usually the sword is the only weapon. Well, maybe some maces as well, like clubs and stuff, but the sword is the weapon which will most likely be the one where the symmetry tool is most useful. Other weapons tend to have fancy blades and asymmetrical blades, stuff like that. So you won't be able to use this tool a whole lot with every single design, but it's certainly very helpful for a beginner. Okay, now that we have an outline, what's next? Basically, you are gonna start coloring now, and you're gonna use colors which you hopefully prepared for yourself on the side already, such as I have. And if you haven't, then you might want to do that before you start. And if you're asking yourself, like, how do I know which colors to use, I unfortunately cannot cover this entire topic in this video. but I will link a video in the description which will help you get started with color palettes if that's something that you would like to learn more about. So to begin this, we're gonna fill in the sword with some base colors. They're gonna be not the darkest, but close to the darkest one of the palette that you want to use for that part. So for the metal part, we're gonna go with this, and here we're gonna go with gold, and for the hilt we're gonna go with wood. And now we have something to begin working with. And now I'm gonna create a new layer and switch to pencil and start by doing something like this. So first, before you start painting, you do have to figure out where your light source is going to be, because when you start thinking about this in terms of where your light source is, then you're gonna very intuitively know where things should be brighter and things should be darker, and in that way it's gonna guide you towards where to put these colors. There are many parameters that you have to take in mind here. So it matters like how distant the light source is going to be from the sword. It matters obviously from which direction the light is coming, and it also matters like if this is a sprite that's in an integrated environment, then are there any other external light sources that might be applied onto it? In this case, no, we're gonna make an isolated sprite which is gonna have its own localized light source. And this is something that you don't actually paint, you just imagine it. And if we imagine the light source like some artificial sun is shining on the sword from above here, you can see what happens basically to the sword. And if I map this onto the sword, and yeah, we can increase the size of this sun even further, and let's just put a nice bright shine. So that's what happens. So I'm not like telling you that you should shade using this technique right now. We're just exploring how light affects the item based on which direction and how close it is. uh, if it was somewhere around here, it would be much more intense, right? You would see something like that. I don't usually prefer to have my light sources so close because it tends to create a sprite which is very, very contrasted. So right here you would have a very bright surface, and on the bottom it would be very dark. uh, I kind of don't like that style. People use that style. It's not like a sin to do it that way. It's just it's a matter of personal preference. So I pick something that's more neutral. Like I make my light source a bit more distant, and usually it's also always coming from this side. But you could also have something like this. So it doesn't have to be here. It could be here. And now look what happens. So if we're from the left side, your sword might look something like that. So as you can see now, our light is coming from the left side, and it also matters um, what kind of shadows and edges you have on your item, because you might want to do something like, oops, now the blending mode is going hard on it. So you might want to do something like that, and pay attention to that and figure that out before you start applying color, because if you that's like the main thing that which informs you how to place color on your item. And if you don't figure that out before you start, you're just going to be aimlessly placing colors around until something looks good, and that's usually not the best approach. So now let's get started. And so I'm gonna use this technique basically for shading. I'm gonna create a gradient. Okay, so there we have a gradient, and now I'm just gonna extend the brighter color on the edges on top of the darker color. So in every one of these areas, I'm gonna do that. And what do you know? It already looks kind of sweet. So you could use that technique. I'll show you a few more later, but for now, let's keep it simple like this because I think it's the simplest technique you can start with. Oops, maybe this won't do. Yeah, this is much better. So the next thing would be the guard. We're gonna go with the gold color, like I said, and let's just, since the color is coming from above here, this part is going to be brighter than this below. So let's do this for now. And now we're also gonna do it for this line. And then we are going to apply a bit of this glow. Now, maybe on the edges as well because they're a bit higher, they're closer to the light source, so we put the brightest pixel here as well. So now I think there's too much contrast between, I kind of messed up this color palette. I didn't include something to bridge the gap between these two colors, like this one and this one. The contrast is too high, so I need something to soften the blow, and you could manually do this, but you could also use a dirty little trick, which is to just reduce the opacity of the brighter color and apply it onto the darker one. And now you get like a mix between them here, which is halfway between them. And that's a nice way to bridge the gap and still use the same kind of uniformity from your color palette, and just yeah, that lets you accomplish things, like I said, quick and dirty. And now we're gonna go for the hilt, and let's do something like, so this part up here is gonna have a little bit more shadow because it's covered by the guard. And now we have light here, and we have the brightest part somewhere around here. So let's do something like that. And all right, I think this is already like a pretty decent sprite. Now we could do some more improvements. We could remove the inner outlines, so you don't need the black pixels which are used for the sword's outline to be also present inside for the outline. Sometimes that's just way too much contrast and way too many dark pixels inside your sprite where they don't need to be, so you can soften them by using the darkest colors of the appropriate color palette of that part instead. So I could do something like this maybe, and in this part we're gonna put the darkest wood instead. You could just play with this since you have like the base sword done, and do some crazy stuff, like maybe you'll add a gem somewhere around here, or you will, I don't know, maybe add one to the bottom, or you could make this hilt even more, not hilt, like the guard, even more fancy. So okay, so now it already looks like a very different sword, like more royal. That would be your first sword. Now let's repeat this process, but use a different kind of shading technique and different maybe light source, just to reiterate and kind of drill this point into your head a bit more clearly. So we're gonna begin once again with an outline, and just let's fill it in the way we did it before. We're going for gold here and wood here. Now we're gonna follow a similar principle to what we did before. Let us just take a brighter color and just paint with it. We can do something like that. Oops. And go even brighter on this part, and then even brighter here. And you can see if you zoom out how this is already starting to shape up. This is a bit different shading approach than the previous one, but you can see the results. Now what we can do is just a tiny bit of that edge brightening again. So we can go with something like that. Okay, and this is just going to give this blade the feel of kind of being a bit elongated and a bit sharp, like kind of jagged. If I turn the background on, yeah, as you can see, it has a different feel than the previous blade. That's for sure. It all depends on what kind of style, once again, you're trying to achieve. I will show you one more technique after this, but let's go for now and finish this. And now we're gonna take the gold. So very similar to what we did before. All right. And okay. So there is definitely a bit different approach that I would take here, because now that I look at it, if you are using this sort of lighting, like this sort of direction of light, then this would not look like that. This would be more like this, okay? And maybe a bit like that, all right? Because we want to sort of localize the light to the left side a bit more here in this approach. Okay, I accidentally drew a line through here, and now it kind of looks badass, so I'm just gonna leave that in. Let me see. Oh yeah, all right. It feels like it has like an intentional kind of cut in it, or something. Like it feels that it was intentionally made that way. I like it, so I'm just gonna leave it like that. And let's go back and finish this. So this area here looks like a nice place to put a gem or something, so let's make a gem. Okay, there we go, there is a gem. And now we can go back to the wood and put in some work here. Actually, this would be better if this was gold, to be honest, like this part. Yeah, all right. That might seem a bit better. The third technique that I would like to show you is something like this. Let me just delete this. Okay, now we have the outline back again. Let's go. Let's do the metal and the wood. Okay, it doesn't matter. Let's just fill this up. So first things first, I'm gonna use the magic wand tool to select the outline and create a copy of it, and I'll store that on the side. And now I'm gonna clip on top of this sword and start doing work with a brush. So basically I'm taking a soft round brush and making things happen on this sword with it. I'm also using lower opacity. I'm just gonna go here to maybe like 70, and that should be fine. And now I can do something like that. All right. And I'll take the opacity down a notch and just make a few finishing touches over here. Now it looks kind of nice. So what you notice right away is that it doesn't look the same way because the outline is missing, and that's why I made a copy of the outline which we will be able to use later. But I am probably not going to use the same dark outline like I did before. Instead, what I'm gonna do is more something like this. Basically, I want to apply some of that lighting effect that I achieved with the brush also on the outline as well. And let me just finish this sprite first using this technique, and then I will deal with the outline later. Now let's go for the guard. Said it's gonna be a bit orangey like that. Okay, and now we can go for the handle. Okay, I think I am gonna leave that for now. Should be fine. And now I'm going to put the old outline back on and just create a new clipping layer for it. And I'm gonna do something like this. Basically, I'm gonna play with the brightness and darkness of the areas and the outline in order to get it to kind of align with the rest of the sword, but at the same time I don't want it to blend in too much because it still has to be kind of dark, and to ensure that the sprite in any environment is properly visible and doesn't blend in with the background and everything. However, yeah, something like that should be good. But I noticed that I probably need a bit more light over here on the sword. So I'm gonna do this. Okay. All right. Um, okay. So this should be, I think, enough to call it a day with this sword. And now we can compare them. And now we can compare them and see what kind of sword we like the best. And there we go. We have made a couple of swords. Each has a bit of a different style, and I think it's cool to have them like side by side to just compare things. Of course, you can now go and make corrections, make additions, make changes to make things fit your own liking and your own needs. This was more aimed at letting you know like what kind of different techniques are out there and what kind of stuff you can experiment with. uh, Also just how to even start doing things like this. If you like these swords, you can use them. I will put a link in the description where you can download them. You can also use the color palettes directly from them, but I will also upload them separately so you can make use of them as well. Links to everything will be down below. Thank you for watching and see you soon.